Áno, všetci chceme byť tak strašne pochopení. A pritom dobre vieme, že niektoré veci, ktoré sa pokúšame chápať, sú jednoducho nepochopiteľné, a to priamo zo svojej podstaty. Prečo vlastne tak úporne hľadáme zámky v každých, teda aj v otvorených dverách? Aj to je jedna z otázok týkajúcich sa Buñuela a jeho Aniela skazy. Nemôže skutočnosť zámku na otvorených dverách pozmeniť status ich otvorenosti a podobne. Tvoriť kultúru znamená vo väčšine prípadov byť nutne akultúrny. Lebo na čo potrebuje tvorca na to, čo tvorí, poznať to, čo tvorí niekto iný. Tvorcovi stačí široko rozsiahle tápanie, on totiž dobre vie, že nejaké tápanie, ani to najširoko rozsiahlejšie, nemôže byť bezbrehé, lebo potom by sa prelialo do niečoho iného. Úlohou tvorcu je uchovať prelievajúce sa vo vlastnej povahe toho, čím je to, a pritom dokázať zabrániť, aby sa naozaj prelialo do niečoho iného. Ide tu teda o permanentné udržiavanie toku chceného, ktoré sa z tohto dôvodu bezpodmienečne stáva mysleným. Mysleným v zmysle tautológie, teda neoddiskutovateľným. Mysleným v zmysle realizácie aktu myšlienky, ktorej kontextom je tok mysleného, neustále pretavovaný v tok myslenia.
I'll be reading the English translation of the passage. There is a name in it that I cannot pronounce. Step in there.
Your passage is a little bit longer.
Yes, the passage I'll be reading is a little bit longer than what Robert wrote.
And it starts a few sentences after I start.
In fact, they're not even related. To create a culture necessarily means, in most cases, to be acultural. For why should a creator need to know what others create for the purposes of his own creation? A widespread and blind groping about is sufficient for a creator, since he knows very well that no groping can be without limits, or else it would spill into something else. The role of the creator is to sustain the spill within one's own character, preventing it from ever spilling into something else. As such, we're dealing with the permanent maintenance of the desired flow, which for this reason becomes a flow of thought in the sense of a tautology. That is indisputable. A flow of thought in the sense of a realization of the act of thought, the flow of what's being thought continually melting into the flow of thinking. This isn't philosophy, just the gradual process of a creative undertaking with a jackhammer in hand. A creator is always more of a worker than an intellectual. A man forced to observe is learning to observe. A circle inside a circle, repeatedly burst like a bubble. The lure of traps, traps that even traps fall into. I say only people who are perverse in their body and soul can perform great deeds, claims František Drtičko in one of his letters, adding, but it must be a pure, beautiful, original, free-spirited perversion, bubbling up from the man's own depth. It may not be a plagiarism, an imitated thing. One thing has a name, another is looking for a name. And it's discovered that the name doesn't belong to the named, but to the designation. The leap into the identity of that name, which is legitimate because it's already legitimized. The leap into the illusion of a break, for it is an illusory break. It never ceases appearing as a fault line.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now, what I would like to ask you, Robert, is about philosophy. What is it? What is it that attracts you to philosophy? You have a philosophical degree in philosophy. You have allegedly written books of philosophical aphorisms, and the piece that you and Martin just read clearly has a philosophical bent. How do you reconcile philosophy and literature? How does it work for you?
Well, for me, philosophy is mostly the art of asking questions. And that's exactly what I like about philosophy.
Okay, that's a concise. I did not expect a concise answer from a philosopher. It's ready to relax. But let me put it to you this way: if a novel is tagged as philosophical in this country, that would be a suicidal act on the part of the publisher. So, because the storytelling is, the great value in the world of American publishing. So, how do you combine? What are your techniques? What are your strategies to combine philosophy and literature? How do you write a novel that is philosophical?
Well, it's very simple. I started with aphorisms, with writing aphorisms, and then I realized that there are only few people who read aphorisms, and only few publishers who are interested in books of aphorisms. And so I decided that I will try to write some novel, and finally I wrote 2 novellas. And what was interesting about it for me was that I could use the style of thinking and style of writing that I used before in my books of aphorisms. That I somehow incorporated my aphoristic thinking into those novels very organically, or I don't know, what do you think? You read some fragments from my book, so maybe you have your own opinion.
I think so, yes. I picked it myself, yes, for the anthology. There's a place for it, certainly, and there has been a dissociation of sensibilities where thinking in fiction has been diminished, let's say. It's difficult to write, for people to write something that requires the reader to go back to the same paragraph more than once, never mind the same book. The other question I want to ask you is, you told me in the green room, which is not green at all, that you moved to Prague, your family moved to Prague just before the breakup of Czechoslovakia in 1993, and that it was a traumatic experience. Can you tell us a little more about that?
It's true. It was connected with the fact that my father was involved in politics after the so-called Velvet Revolution in 1989 in our country, and he was in fact the head of the first political party after the first free elections, after the 40 years of communism in our country, and that was very exciting time, the time of revolution, and in 1989 and the beginning of 1990, and then suddenly Slovak nationalism started to grow, and the situation started to be unbearable for my father, because he had some very serious argue with former Prime Minister Vladimir Mečiar, and the consequences of that were that we had to move, our family had to move from Slovakia, and we decided to move to Prague because my father had some connections there from the past, and so it happened in 1991.
91, that's right. So you write in Slovakian while living in Prague. Is that difficult?
Yes. Yes. No, I'm not answering for your for your 2 questions.
Well,
yes.
So what is difficult about it? Yeah, obviously, you're exposed to the language that is, in my ear at least, close to Slovakian, and you live in Czech, whereas you have to write in Slovakian.
It's difficult that it is not difficult. What is not difficult is to write in Slovak, where when you are Slovak, which is my case. So it's not difficult to write in Slovak, but what is difficult is to be read in Czech Republic when you write in Slovak. because Czechs don't read Slovak. They don't read Slovak writers. They are not interested in reading Slovak writers, even though they are the closest neighbors of Slovaks, which is the fact. And so when I write in Slovak, I have to publish my books in Slovakia, which I don't want.
Right.
So the result is that I decided to publish my books in English.
Yeah, it's a good solution. Do you
But
write?
of course, I write them in Slovak, but and then they are translated into English.
Do you, of course, do you write in Czech at all?
I'm able to write in Czech also, but not this kind of writing. I can write short journalistic pieces and so on in Czech. But I worked in Literární noviny newspaper for a while, so I have this experience. But this kind of writing is, each word is really important, and so my sensibility is built on my knowledge of Slovak.
Thank you. We'll continue the conversation after everyone reads. It will be more general, I suppose.